Romance in Charleston, South Carolina. The historic charm of Charleston served as the perfect backdrop for a love story that captivated the city's elite. With its cobblestone streets, grand antebellum mansions, and stunning coastal sunsets, Charleston exuded a romantic allure that seemed almost too good to be true, much like the relationship of Emily Carter and Daniel Preston. Emily was a bright, ambitious undergraduate at the College of Charleston, studying communications and working part-time as an event coordinator. With her auburn hair and infectious laugh, she lit up every room she entered. A native of a small town in Georgia, she came to Charleston with big dreams of a career in public relations. She often said Charleston was her city of possibilities, a place where she could reinvent herself. Daniel Preston, on the other hand, was a man whose name carried weight. A seasoned business administrator, he had built a logistics empire that served clients across the Southeast. At just 39 years old, his success made him a local celebrity. Known for his charm and meticulous attention to detail, Daniel was a regular feature at charity galas and exclusive social gatherings. To outsiders, his life seemed perfect: wealth, influence, and a network of powerful friends. Their paths crossed at one such event, a charity gala held at a waterfront mansion. Emily was working behind the scenes, ensuring everything from the floral arrangements to the seating chart was flawless. Daniel was the evening's keynote speaker, delivering an inspiring speech about entrepreneurship and philanthropy. After his speech, Daniel made his way to the bar where Emily stood double-checking the event schedule. He struck up a conversation, drawn by her poise and radiant smile. "You're the one making all this magic happen," he said, gesturing to the elegantly decorated venue. Emily looked up, surprised that a man of his stature had noticed her. "It's a team effort, really," she replied modestly. The conversation flowed effortlessly. Emily's intelligence and warmth intrigued Daniel, while his confidence and success mesmerized her. By the end of the night, Daniel had managed to secure her phone number, much to the envy of the other guests. Over the next few weeks, their connection deepened. Daniel began courting Emily with grand gestures: dinner at Charleston's finest restaurants, flowers delivered to her dorm, and private tours of his company's headquarters. Emily, though initially overwhelmed by his world of wealth and influence, found herself falling for him. He was attentive, charming, and made her feel like the center of his universe. Their relationship quickly became the talk of Charleston's social circles. Friends and acquaintances gushed over how perfect they seemed together. Emily was seen as Daniel's muse, a refreshing contrast to the polished but predictable women he had dated in the past. Yet beneath the surface there were subtle cracks. Daniel's intensity occasionally bordered on possessiveness. He would question Emily about her plans, her friends, and even her future aspirations. Emily dismissed these moments, attributing them to his protective nature. She believed his overwhelming care was simply a testament to how deeply he loved her. As their relationship blossomed, Emily's life transformed. She moved into Daniel's sprawling home overlooking the Charleston harbor, trading her modest student apartment for a life of luxury. Yet she often wondered if she was losing a part of herself in the process. Charleston, with all its charm and allure, became the silent witness to the couple's whirlwind romance, a relationship that seemed destined for happiness but carried undercurrents of tension that no one, not even Emily, fully understood. Little did they know, this enchanting city would one day become synonymous with a love story that turned dark, unraveling into a tale of obsession, betrayal, and tragedy. A life of glamour and ambition, Emily Carter's life seemed to transform overnight. Once a diligent college student balancing part-time work and late-night study sessions, she now found herself living in a world most could only dream of. Daniel Preston, the charismatic business tycoon, had swept her off her feet and into his world of wealth and influence. Together, they were Charleston's golden couple, a dazzling pair who seemed destined for greatness. Daniel's reputation preceded him wherever he went. He was known not just as a successful businessman, but as a visionary who had built his logistics empire from the ground up. His rise from a modest background in Greenville, South Carolina, to a multi-million-dollar enterprise was a story often retold in entrepreneurial circles. Yet Daniel wasn't just about business. He cultivated an image of sophistication and charm. His tailored suits, carefully chosen words, and generous donations to local charities made him a beloved figure in Charleston's high society. He was the kind of man people admired and envied. Emily, meanwhile, was adapting to a lifestyle she never anticipated. Her days, once filled with classes and internships, were now punctuated by shopping trips to designer boutiques, charity luncheons, and evening galas. She became a regular fixture on Daniel's arm, charming everyone with her youthful energy and warm smile. But for all the glamour, Emily struggled to find her footing. She had aspirations of her own, dreams of a career in public relations, but Daniel's world was all-encompassing. He encouraged her to focus on their relationship, subtly steering her away from the independence she had once cherished. "I can give you everything you'll ever need," he would say, his voice dripping with affection. "You don't need to worry about working so hard anymore." At first, Emily found his protectiveness endearing, a sign of his love and commitment. But as time went on, she began to feel the walls closing in. Daniel's influence extended into every aspect of her life. He chose the restaurants they dined at, the vacations they took, even the friends they kept. Emily's friends and family noticed the changes. Her best friend Sarah once teased her about her Cinderella story, but concern soon replaced the light-hearted jokes. "You seem different," Sarah said during one of their increasingly infrequent coffee dates. "Are you happy, Emily?" Emily smiled, brushing off the comment. "Of course I'm happy. Daniel loves me, and I love him. Isn't that what matters?" But behind the smile, doubts lingered. Emily missed the freedom of making her own choices, the satisfaction of working toward her own goals. Still, she told herself this was the price of love. Daniel had given her so much, how could she question his intentions? Daniel, for his part, appeared the perfect partner. He lavished Emily with gifts and attention, ensuring she always felt special. But there was an undercurrent to his generosity, a need to control and possess. He kept a close eye on her schedule, her social media, and even her interactions with others. "I just want to protect you," he would say whenever she questioned his behavior. The world can be a dangerous place. As the months turned into years, Emily learned to navigate life with Daniel. She adapted to his expectations, tucking away her doubts and convincing herself that this was what love looked like. But every now and then, in the quiet moments when she was alone, a sense of unease crept in. Daniel's world was glamorous, yes, but it was also suffocating. And though Emily didn't yet realize it, she was losing herself piece by piece, her independence eroding under the weight of Daniel's love. Charleston continued to watch their lives unfold, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. To the outside world, they were a perfect couple. But perfection, as Emily was beginning to understand, often hides the darkest truths. The getaway that changed everything. Emily had always been drawn to the serenity of the ocean. To her, the rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore was a kind of therapy, a reprieve from the chaos of Charleston's social scene, and more recently her life with Daniel. When Daniel suggested a romantic getaway to a secluded beachfront resort on Hilton Head Island, Emily agreed, hopeful it would rekindle the warmth they had once shared. The trip had been Daniel's idea, presented as a spontaneous escape from their busy lives. "Just the two of us," he said, his tone warm and convincing. Emily tried to push away the unease that had been growing in her chest. Perhaps this was exactly what they needed, a break from the noise, a chance to reconnect. The resort was nothing short of breathtaking. Nestled between the dunes and shaded by towering palmetto trees, it promised privacy and luxury. Their suite overlooked the ocean, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the horizon like a painting. On their first evening, Daniel arranged a private dinner on the beach, complete with a string quartet and candlelight that flickered in the salty breeze. Emily couldn't deny the effort Daniel was making. He seemed more attentive, more present than he had been in months. As they sipped wine and watched the sunset, she allowed herself to believe that this getaway might be a turning point. But the cracks in their relationship were never far from the surface. The following morning, as Emily prepared for a leisurely walk along the shore, Daniel seemed distracted, his usual charm replaced with a quiet intensity. He sat by the window, staring out at the waves, his jaw tight. "What's on your mind?" Emily asked, approaching him cautiously. "Nothing," he said, his tone curt. "Just thinking about work." Emily knew better. Daniel rarely let work consume him during their time together. Something else was bothering him, but she didn't press further. She had learned that Daniel's moods could shift quickly, and it was often best to let them pass. Later that day, they rented bicycles to explore the island's trails. At first, it felt like old times, Daniel racing ahead, challenging Emily to catch up, their laughter echoing through the shaded paths. But as the afternoon wore on, Daniel's playful demeanor gave way to irritation. He snapped at Emily over minor things: a missed turn, a slow pace. "I just thought this would be more fun," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. Emily felt the sting of his words but stayed silent, unwilling to escalate the tension. The unease that had been simmering since their arrival began to bubble over. By the third day, the atmosphere between them had grown heavy. Emily tried to lighten the mood with small gestures, a handwritten note left on his pillow, a suggestion to explore the island's art galleries, but Daniel remained distant. It was during dinner that night when everything came to a head. Seated at an intimate corner table, surrounded by couples lost in their own romantic evenings, Daniel's irritation turned to anger. "I feel like I'm the only one trying here," he said suddenly, his voice low but sharp. Emily looked up from her plate, stunned. "What are you talking about?" "I'm trying, Daniel. I agreed to come here, didn't I?" "That's not what I mean," he replied, his eyes dark. "You've been distant, uninvested. It's like you're not even here." Emily's pulse quickened. "That's not fair," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been doing everything I can to make this work." Their argument, though quiet enough not to draw attention, was intense. Words were exchanged that couldn't be taken back, and by the time they returned to their suite, the rift between them felt insurmountable. The next morning, Emily woke to an empty bed. Daniel was gone, leaving only a terse note: "Went for a walk. Be back later." Emily decided to use the time alone to clear her head. She spent the morning wandering the shoreline, her thoughts heavy. As she walked, she replayed the events of the past few days, trying to make sense of how their relationship had come to this point. When she returned to the suite, Daniel was still nowhere to be found. Hours passed. She called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. By evening, a knot of anxiety had formed in her chest. And then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel returned, but something was different. His expression was calm, too calm. He didn't explain where he had been, and Emily didn't ask. That night, as they sat in silence, the air between them crackled with unspoken tension. The getaway, meant to bring them closer, had only driven them further apart. Emily didn't know it then, but this trip would mark the beginning of the end, a chain of events that would unravel into a tragedy no one saw coming. A night to remember. The final night of their getaway was marked by an eerie quietness. The ocean waves crashing against the shore seemed louder than usual, almost intrusive in the silence that enveloped Daniel and Emily. They had avoided each other all day, communicating only in clipped sentences and avoiding eye contact. Emily longed for a way to mend the rift, but the tension between them was palpable, as if one wrong word could ignite an explosion. Dinner that evening was subdued. They ate in the resort's main dining room, surrounded by the soft hum of other couples enjoying their meals. Emily picked at her food, unable to stomach the thick air of unease between her and Daniel. He barely spoke, his gaze fixed somewhere over her shoulder as if he were lost in thought. When the meal was over, Daniel suggested they take a walk along the beach. Emily hesitated but agreed, hoping this might be a chance to salvage what was left of the trip. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver glow over the sand as they strolled in silence. The tension between them seemed to ebb slightly as the sound of the waves filled the void. But then Daniel stopped abruptly, turning to face her. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but unnervingly cold. "Do you ever think about what's next for us? What the future holds?" The question caught her off guard. "Of course I do," she said softly. "I thought we were building a life together. Isn't that what we've been doing?" Daniel's expression darkened. "It doesn't feel that way anymore," he said. "Lately it feels like you're pulling away, like you don't trust me." Emily's heart raced. "That's not true," she insisted, though her voice wavered. "I've been trying, Daniel. I really have." "Have you?" He pressed, stepping closer. "Because it feels like you're just waiting for an excuse to leave, like you're looking for a way out." Emily felt a pang of fear at the intensity in his voice. "Daniel, where is this coming from? Why are you saying these things?" His eyes bore into hers, unblinking. "Because I need to know where we stand, Emily. I need to know if you're in this for real or if I'm wasting my time. Emily took a step back, the sand shifting beneath her feet. I don't understand why you're doing this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Why are you trying to pick a fight? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned and stared out at the ocean, his profile silhouetted against the moonlit waves. Sometimes, he said after a long pause, I wonder if we made a mistake. The words hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. A mistake? She echoed, her voice trembling. You think we're a mistake? He didn't respond, and the silence that followed was deafening. Emily's mind raced, her emotions a storm of confusion, hurt, and anger. She turned and began walking back toward the resort, needing to escape the suffocating tension. Emily, wait, Daniel called after her, but she didn't stop. Back in the suite, Emily locked the bathroom door and leaned against it, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, her face pale and her eyes wide with disbelief. This wasn't how their romantic getaway was supposed to end. This wasn't how their love story was supposed to unfold. Later that night, as Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she heard Daniel moving around the suite. He was restless, his footsteps heavy as he paced the room. She wanted to reach out to him, to bridge the gap between them, but something held her back. And then, at some point in the early hours of the morning, she drifted off to sleep. When she woke, the sun was streaming through the curtains, and the suite was eerily quiet. She called out for Daniel, but there was no answer. Panic began to set in as she noticed his belongings were still in the room, his wallet, his phone, but he was nowhere to be found. Emily searched the suite, then the resort grounds, her fear growing with every passing moment. The staff joined the search, combing the beach and the surrounding area. By the time the police arrived, the once idyllic getaway had turned into a scene of chaos and dread. Daniel Preston was missing. The search begins. The sun rose higher over Hilton Head Island, casting a golden glow on the chaos unfolding at the resort. Emily paced the lobby, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she tried to keep her composure. Each minute that passed without news of Daniel's whereabouts felt like an eternity. Police officers in crisp uniforms moved purposefully through the resort, asking questions, taking notes, and organizing search efforts. Guests murmured in hushed tones, their curiosity tinged with concern. To Emily, the entire scene felt surreal, like she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. I'm sure he just went for a run or something, Emily told one of the officers, her voice trembling. He always likes to clear his head in the mornings. The officer, a middle-aged man with a kind but serious expression, nodded. We'll do everything we can to find him, ma'am, he assured her. Do you remember what he was wearing the last time you saw him? Emily closed her eyes, trying to recall the details through her haze of panic. A blue t-shirt and gray shorts, she said finally. He wasn't wearing his shoes when I last saw him. The officer made a note before stepping aside to speak with his team. Emily sank into one of the plush chairs in the lobby, her head in her hands. She couldn't shake the gnawing sense of dread that had settled in her chest. As the hours passed, the search expanded. Police combed the beach, the nearby trails, and even the waters surrounding the island. A helicopter circled overhead, its blades slicing through the air as it scanned the area from above. Emily watched the activity from the resort's patio, her mind racing with possibilities. Where could Daniel have gone? Had he wandered off to cool down after their argument? Was he angry enough to leave her behind? Or had something happened to him? By midday, the police began interviewing Emily more thoroughly. Were there any issues between you and your husband during your stay here? The officer asked, his pen poised over his notebook. Emily hesitated. We had some disagreements, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It's been a tough time for us lately. But I never thought he'd just leave like this. Did he seem upset when you last spoke to him? Yes, she said, her throat tightening. But I thought he just needed some space. He's not the type to run off without telling me where he's going. The officer studied her for a moment before nodding. We're treating this as a missing person case for now, he said. But if you think of anything else, anything unusual or out of the ordinary, please let us know immediately. Emily nodded, her heart pounding. She didn't want to believe it, but the officer's tone suggested he wasn't ruling out foul play. As the day stretched into evening, Emily found herself surrounded by a growing number of reporters and curious onlookers. News of Daniel's disappearance had spread quickly, and the media descended on the resort like vultures. Cameras flashed and microphones were thrust in her face as reporters peppered her with questions. "Mrs. Preston, do you believe your husband was abducted? Were there any signs of trouble in your marriage? Do you think he might have left voluntarily?" Emily said nothing, her silence only fueling the speculation. She retreated to the suite, closing the door behind her and collapsing onto the bed. The room, once a haven of luxury and comfort, now felt suffocating. As she stared at the ceiling, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced toward the window, half expecting to see someone peering in. But the view was empty, just the darkening sky and the rolling waves in the distance. The hours ticked by and still there was no sign of Daniel. As night fell, the search efforts slowed, and the once bustling resort grew eerily quiet. Emily sat by the window, watching the moonlight dance on the water, her mind replaying the events of the past few days. Where was Daniel? And, perhaps more terrifyingly, what if he wasn't coming back? The first clue emerges the next morning brought an air of uneasy anticipation. Police resumed their search at first light, and Emily sat in the suite, anxiously awaiting news. She hadn't slept. Every creak, every gust of wind outside had sent her heart racing. The fear was all-consuming now. Around mid-morning, there was a knock at the door. Emily rushed to open it, finding Officer Jacobs, the lead investigator, standing there with a grave expression. "Mrs. Preston, we found something," he said, holding up a plastic evidence bag. Inside was Daniel's wedding ring, the gold band glinting in the sunlight. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Where did you find it?" "On the beach, about half a mile from the resort," Jacobs said. "It was partially buried in the sand. Do you recognize it?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That's Daniel's ring. He never takes it off." Jacobs nodded. "We've expanded the search area. We'll also be sending divers into the water to see if there's anything else." Emily's knees buckled, and she sank into the nearest chair. The sight of Daniel's ring filled her with a sinking dread. If he had taken it off, it could mean he'd left it as a message, or, worse, that it had been removed against his will. As the hours passed, the beach became a hive of activity. Officers scoured the sand while a team of divers methodically searched the waters. Emily stayed inside, unable to watch the scene unfold. She sat by the window, her mind racing with questions. Why was his ring left behind? Was this a sign of foul play? By afternoon, the police found another clue: Daniel's phone. It was discovered farther down the beach, near a rocky outcrop where the tide often washed debris ashore. The screen was cracked, and the phone was waterlogged, rendering it useless for immediate analysis. Still, the discovery heightened the sense of urgency. When Officer Jacobs informed Emily of the find, she felt a mix of relief and dread. "Does this mean he was near the water?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's possible," Jacobs said. "We're running every test we can. For now, we're treating this as a missing person case with suspicious circumstances." The phrase "suspicious circumstances" echoed in Emily's mind long after the officer left. What did it mean? Could someone have harmed Daniel? That evening, as the search continued, Emily received an unexpected call from one of Daniel's closest colleagues. "Andrew." "Emily, I just heard the news," Andrew said, his voice tinged with concern. "I wanted to check on you. Is there anything I can do?" "Thank you, Andrew," Emily said, her voice cracking. It's been overwhelming." "I can only imagine," Andrew said. There was a pause before he added, "You know, Daniel mentioned some things to me recently that seemed off." Emily's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "He didn't go into detail," Andrew said carefully, "but he seemed stressed more than usual. He said something about feeling trapped, about needing to get away. I didn't press him, but now I wonder if it's connected." Feeling trapped. The words cut through Emily like a knife. Was Daniel unhappy in their marriage? Had he confided in Andrew because he couldn't talk to her? After the call, Emily sat in the darkened suite, replaying Andrew's words over and over. The narrative in her head was shifting. Could Daniel's disappearance be voluntary? Had he chosen to leave, leaving behind his ring and phone as a way to sever ties? Or was that just a convenient story, one she could tell herself to avoid the darker possibility? That night, a storm rolled in, the wind howling through the resort and the rain lashing against the windows. Emily watched the storm from her window, her mind a tempest of its own. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something, that the clues didn't add up. And as the storm raged outside, so too did her growing fear that Daniel's disappearance was no accident. Secrets unearthed the storm left behind a damp and overcast morning, mirroring Emily's desolation. She was summoned to the police station, where Officer Jacobs presented new findings. The atmosphere in the small, stark room was tense, and Emily braced herself as Jacobs handed her a file. "We've reviewed Daniel's phone records," Jacobs began, his voice measured. "There are some unusual patterns we need to discuss." Emily's fingers trembled as she opened the file. Inside were printouts of text messages and call logs. Most were mundane calls to work colleagues, messages between them. But one number stood out. It was labeled only as C and appeared frequently, especially in the days leading up to their getaway. "Who is C?" Jacobs asked, watching her reaction closely. Emily stared at the file, her mind racing. She didn't recognize the number, and the frequency of contact made her stomach churn. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never heard him mention anyone by that name." Jacobs nodded, his expression unreadable. "We're working to trace the number, but it's clear whoever this has had significant contact with your husband." The revelation left Emily shaken. Had Daniel been keeping secrets from her? Was this C the reason for his disappearance? Back at the resort, Emily found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about her husband. She searched through his belongings, desperate for answers. His suitcase yielded nothing unusual, just neatly folded clothes and his laptop. It was the laptop that piqued her interest. She opened it and, after a few tries, managed to guess the password, the date of their wedding anniversary. As she scrolled through his emails and saved documents, her heart sank. Buried among the files was an email exchange with someone identified only by their initials, CM. The tone of the emails was casual but hinted at something deeper. One message stood out: "C, I'm looking forward to seeing you again soon. This getaway will give me the clarity I need. Thanks for being my rock." Emily's hands shook as she read the message. Who was C-Mem, and what role did they play in Daniel's life and his disappearance? Before she could delve further, her phone buzzed. "It was Jacobs. We've traced the number," he said. "It belongs to a woman named Claire Monroe. Does that name mean anything to you?" Emily's mind raced. Claire Monroe. The name wasn't familiar, but it felt significant. "No," she said slowly. "Who is she?" Jacobs hesitated. "She's a real estate agent in Charleston. We've contacted her, and she's agreed to speak with us. I think it would be helpful if you were there." Emily's pulse quickened. A face-to-face meeting with someone who might hold the answers to Daniel's disappearance. She agreed immediately, despite the knot of dread forming in her stomach. That afternoon, Emily found herself sitting across from Claire Monroe in a small interrogation room at the police station. Claire was elegant, with sharp features and an air of confidence. Her demeanor was calm, almost too calm, and it unsettled Emily. "Ms. Monroe," Jacobs began, "we appreciate you coming in. We understand you were in frequent contact with Daniel Preston." Claire nodded, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "Yes, Daniel and I worked together on a few projects. He was considering investing in some real estate developments I manage." Emily's eyes narrowed. That didn't explain the tone of the emails or the frequency of contact. "Were you involved with Daniel beyond a professional capacity?" Jacobs pressed. Claire hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. "We were friends," she said finally. "I won't deny we were close, but I had nothing to do with his disappearance." Emily couldn't hold back. Why was he confiding in you? What did he mean when he said you were his rock? Claire's gaze met Emily's, steady and unapologetic. "Daniel was struggling," she said simply. "He felt trapped in his career, in his personal life. He needed someone to talk to, and I was that person." The words cut Emily like a knife. She wanted to demand answers, to scream that Claire had no right to interfere in their marriage, but the weight of the situation held her back. Jacobs leaned forward. "When was the last time you spoke with Daniel?" 3 days ago, Claire said without hesitation. "He told me he was going on a trip to clear his head. That's all I know." Jacob studied her, his expression unreadable. Did he mention anything about feeling unsafe? About anyone threatening him? No, Claire said firmly. Daniel wasn't running from anyone. He was running from himself. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Emily's mind spun with questions. If Daniel had confided in Claire about his struggles, why hadn't he told her? As Claire was escorted out of the station, Jacobs turned to Emily. We'll look deeper into Claire Monroe's connection to Daniel, he said. But for now, we can't rule her out or anyone else. Emily nodded numbly, her heart heavy with doubt. Daniel's disappearance was no longer just a mystery, it was a maze of secrets and lies, each revelation pulling her deeper into the unknown. The evidence beneath the surface the following morning. Emily was summoned back to the police station. Officer Jacobs greeted her with a grim expression, a folder in his hand. We found something you need to see, he said, motioning for her to sit. Emily's stomach twisted as he opened the folder, revealing a series of photographs. The first was of Daniel's wallet, discovered partially buried in a patch of dune grass near the beach. We found this early this morning, Jacob said. It was deliberately hidden, not something the tide would have washed up. Emily's pulse quickened as Jacobs flipped to the next photo, a jagged tear in the sand, as though something heavy had been dragged. The area around the wallet suggests a struggle, Jacobs continued. And there's more. Our divers recovered this from the water nearby. He placed a sealed evidence bag on the table. Inside was a piece of fabric, a scrap of dark material with a faint pattern. Emily's breath caught. She recognized it immediately. That's from Daniel's jacket, she whispered. Jacobs nodded. It matches the description you gave us. We've sent it for forensic analysis, but it's clear this was no accident. Someone wanted to make it difficult to find him. The weight of his words crushed her. Someone had harmed Daniel. Someone had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. But who? The investigation gained momentum as police combed the area around the discovery site. Detectives began reconstructing the timeline of Daniel's last known movements, piecing together fragments of surveillance footage and witness statements. One clip, captured by a nearby convenience store camera, showed Daniel entering the store late on the evening of his disappearance. He appeared agitated, glancing over his shoulder as if he were being followed. The cashier, interviewed by police, confirmed Daniel's behavior. He seemed nervous, she said. Kept looking at the door like he expected someone to come in. The revelation added a new layer of urgency. If Daniel had been in danger that night, it raised the question, who had been following him? Emily, unable to sit idly by, began her own investigation. She returned to the resort, retracing their steps from that fateful night. The moonlit dinner, the beach walk, it all felt like a distant memory now, overshadowed by the dark cloud of uncertainty. She noticed things she hadn't before, the way the staff exchanged nervous glances when she asked about Daniel, the subtle avoidance of her questions. One employee, a young housekeeper named Maria, finally broke her silence. Mrs. Preston, she said hesitantly, pulling Emily aside. I don't know if this helps, but I saw Mr. Preston talking to someone that night. A woman. They were arguing by the pool. Emily's heart sank. Did you recognize her? Maria shook her head. No, but she had dark hair and was wearing a red dress. I only caught a glimpse before they moved out of sight. The description sent a chill down Emily's spine. Claire Monroe. The red dress matched the one Claire had been wearing during their interview at the station. Emily immediately called Officer Jacobs, relaying what she had learned. He promised to investigate further and assured her that Claire was still a person of interest. Later that evening, Jacobs called Emily with a significant update. We've obtained Claire Monroe's cell phone records, he said. She was at the resort the night of Daniel's disappearance. Emily's blood ran cold. She lied, she said, her voice trembling. She did, Jacobs confirmed. We're bringing her in for questioning. The interrogation room was tense as Claire sat across from Jacobs, her calm demeanor beginning to crack. Ms. Monroe, Jacobs began, we've confirmed that you were at the resort the night Daniel disappeared. Care to explain? Claire's eyes darted nervously. I didn't think it was relevant, she stammered. I only went to talk to him. He'd been avoiding my calls, and I needed closure. Closure about what? Jacobs pressed. Claire hesitated, then sighed. We were having an affair, she admitted. It started a few months ago. He said he felt trapped in his marriage and needed someone who understood him. Emily, watching from behind the one-way mirror, felt the floor drop out from under her. The betrayal cut deep, but it was overshadowed by a more pressing question. Had Claire's feelings for Daniel turned deadly? Did you argue that night? Jacobs asked. Yes, Claire admitted. He told me it was over, that he wanted to work things out with Emily. I was upset, but I left. That's the last I saw of him. Jacobs leaned forward, his tone sharp. Can anyone verify that you left the resort? Claire's silence was deafening. As the evidence mounted against Claire, another shocking discovery sent the case spiraling in a new direction. A fingerprint found on Daniel's phone didn't belong to Claire or Emily. It belonged to a third party, someone police had yet to identify. The case was far from over, and as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Emily braced herself for the truth, whatever it might be. The shocking revelation of the fingerprint discovery was a bombshell. For weeks, investigators had focused on Claire Monroe as their prime suspect, but the unknown print suggested the involvement of someone else entirely, a shadowy figure whose presence had yet to be explained. Officer Jacobs called Emily to update her. We've sent the fingerprint through national databases. If this person has a record, we'll know soon. Emily's anxiety spiked. What does this mean? Does this clear Claire? Jacobs hesitated. Not necessarily. Claire had motive and opportunity. But this new evidence opens up the possibility of a third party. We're not ruling anything out. The waiting was unbearable. Emily, unable to sit idly by, pored over every detail she could remember about that night. She replayed their conversations, the dinner, the fleeting moments when Daniel had seemed distracted. Had he known someone was watching them? Had he been hiding something even deeper than his affair with Claire? 2 days later, the fingerprint results came back. The match was chilling. The print belonged to a man named Victor Calloway, a private investigator with a criminal record for extortion and harassment. Victor's connection to Daniel was unclear, but his presence at the scene raised alarming questions. Why had Daniel been in contact with someone like him? And what role had Victor played in his disappearance? Jacobs wasted no time. Victor Calloway was tracked down to a rundown motel on the outskirts of Charleston. When officers arrived, they found him packing his belongings, clearly preparing to flee. Victor was brought in for questioning, his disheveled appearance and defiant attitude setting everyone on edge. Mr. Calloway, Jacobs began, your fingerprint was found on Daniel Preston's phone. Care to explain? Victor smirked, leaning back in his chair. I don't know any Daniel Preston, he said coolly. Jacobs slammed a photo of Daniel onto the table. This man. You don't recognize him. Victor's smirk faltered for a moment before he recovered. Look, I've seen a lot of faces. Maybe he hired me for something. I don't keep track. Jacob's eyes narrowed. Hired you for what? What were you doing at the resort the night he disappeared? Victor's silence was deafening. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice low. I was following orders. That's all I'll say without a lawyer. Emily, watching from the observation room, felt her blood run cold. Following orders? Who would have hired a man like Victor to spy on Daniel? The answer came later that night, when Jacobs received an anonymous tip. The caller, who refused to identify themselves, claimed that Victor had been working for none other than Claire Monroe. Claire was brought back in for questioning, her calm facade now completely shattered. Yes, I hired him, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. But it wasn't what you think. I wasn't trying to hurt Daniel. I just wanted to know the truth. About what? Jacobs pressed. About who he was meeting, Claire sobbed. He'd been acting strange, and I thought there was someone besides me. I hired Victor to follow him, but I swear I didn't know it'd come to this. Her confession sent shockwaves through the investigation. Claire's jealousy and obsession had driven her to desperate measures, but was she telling the whole truth? As detectives dug deeper, another layer of the mystery emerged. Surveillance footage from a nearby dock showed Victor meeting with an unidentified man shortly after Daniel's disappearance. The man was tall, wearing a hooded jacket that obscured his face. He handed Victor an envelope, which Victor pocketed before walking away. Jacobs played the footage for Emily, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. Do you recognize him? He asked. Emily shook her head, her heart pounding. No. But why would Victor be meeting with someone else? Was he double-crossing Claire? Jacob's expression was grim. That's what we need to find out. The breakthrough came when police traced the envelope back to a bank account in Charleston. The account, now frozen, belonged to none other than Daniel Preston himself. The revelation left everyone reeling. Why would Daniel be paying off a man like Victor? And how did it connect to his disappearance? The answer was buried in Daniel's financial records, where investigators uncovered a series of secret transactions. The payments, totaling tens of thousands of dollars, were all linked to an offshore account. It was a stunning twist. Daniel, the charming and successful business administrator, had been hiding a web of secrets that no one, neither Emily nor Claire, had suspected. Emily's world crumbled as the truth began to take shape. Her husband, the man she had loved and trusted, was not the person she thought he was. But as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, one question remained: where was Daniel now? The final confession, the discovery of Daniel's offshore accounts and secret payments, rocked Emily to her core. She felt betrayed, not just by his affair with Claire, but by the man she had shared her life with. Daniel's actions seemed to be part of a much larger, darker story, one that she was only beginning to understand. In the days that followed, the investigation into Daniel's finances revealed more troubling details. The payments to Victor Calloway, though frequent, were only part of the puzzle. There were also encrypted messages in Daniel's phone messages that appeared to be from someone he had been communicating with in secret. Jacobs and his team worked tirelessly to decipher the codes. The messages were cryptic, hinting at a business deal gone awry, one that had gone beyond just financial trouble. It was clear now that Daniel had been involved in something much more dangerous, something that had put his life in jeopardy long before that fateful night on the beach. Emily couldn't stop herself from questioning everything. Had Daniel been hiding his business dealings from her, or had he been keeping secrets even from himself? She had never once suspected that the man she loved had lived a double life. And then, just when things seemed to be spiraling out of control, the breakthrough came. It was a phone call that Emily would never forget. The voice on the other end was shaky, panicked. "You have to come down here?" "Now. We have him." It was Officer Jacobs. He wasn't at the station, he was at a nondescript warehouse on the edge of Charleston. "What do you mean you have him?" Emily asked, heart racing. "We found Daniel," Jacobs replied. "Or at least we think it's him." Emily's heart stopped for a moment. "What do you mean, think?" There was a long pause. "Come see for yourself." The warehouse was dark and eerily quiet when Emily arrived. Jacobs met her at the door, his face somber. He led her into the main area, where a large, industrial freezer stood against the far wall. Inside the freezer was a body, a man in his mid-30s, dressed in a suit. The face was pale and lifeless, but Emily could see the unmistakable features of her husband, Daniel Preston. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced them down. She needed answers, and this was the only way to get them. "Is it really him?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jacobs nodded. "We're awaiting final confirmation from the medical examiner, but based on the dental records and what we've gathered so far, we're fairly certain." Emily stepped closer, her stomach twisting. "How did this happen? What happened to him?" Jacobs paused. "We've been following a lead. It seems that Daniel's dealings with Victor Calloway weren't just about a personal affair. It was about money. Big money. He got involved with a group of investors, risky investors who had their own agenda. They didn't take kindly to Daniel backing out of the deal." Emily's breath caught. "So they killed him." Jacob shook his head. "It wasn't that simple. Daniel was involved with people who were far more dangerous than anyone realized. And when he tried to back out of the business arrangement, it became clear he had put a target on his back. They made sure he couldn't walk away. As the investigation unraveled further, it became apparent that Victor Calloway was merely a small part of a much larger web. The group Daniel had become entangled with was connected to high-profile criminal operations, and they had used Victor to keep tabs on him. Victor, realizing that Daniel was planning to expose their activities, had made a fatal decision. The night Daniel disappeared, he had confronted Victor, demanding to know what was going on. In a fit of rage, Victor had attacked him, and in the struggle, Daniel had been fatally injured. However, Victor's involvement didn't end there. After Daniel's death, He'd staged the scene to make it appear as though Daniel had run off, hoping to throw off investigators. He had then kept his mouth shut, fearing for his own life. But the most shocking revelation came when the investigation turned to Claire Monroe. It wasn't just her affair with Daniel that had led her to hire Victor, it was her desperation to maintain her position in his life. When she found out Daniel was pulling away from her and trying to fix his marriage, she panicked. She had known about his dealings with dangerous people and feared he would expose her as well. Claire, too, had been hiding her own secrets. She had been financially linked to the same dangerous investors, a fact she had kept from everyone, including Daniel. It was the financial ties that had led her to hire Victor, but it was her fear of being implicated in Daniel's betrayal of the group that had pushed her to silence him. The shocking truth was now laid bare. Daniel had been murdered by the very people he had trusted, and Claire had played a part in the scheme to cover it up. The emotional toll on Emily was immense. The man she had once adored had led a secret life full of lies and dangerous choices. His death, though tragic, had exposed a web of deceit and corruption that no one could have predicted. As the legal proceedings began, both Claire and Victor were charged with conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and involvement in Daniel's murder. Their trial would be a spectacle, but for Emily, the damage had already been done. She had lost her husband, the life she thought she knew, and her peace of mind. But through the pain, Emily found strength to seek justice, to reclaim her life, and to move forward from the shadows of betrayal and loss. The truth had come out, but it would never erase the scars.